A few weeks ago, I let a guy in my social circle believe he'd won. He had a new sports car. I had an old sedan that coughed on cold mornings. Every time we met, he'd turn it into a joke, sometimes loud enough for strangers to hear. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. What he didn't know was that I had something far more interesting than a shiny car. And on the weekend trip, when the blades started spinning above us, his face told me everything. Some people show off because they want validation. Others do it because they need an audience. Mark was the second kind. We weren't close friends, more like those people who end up in the same gatherings because of overlapping friend groups. At first, I didn't mind him. He was loud, but in a way that could be entertaining when you weren't the target. That changed the day he noticed my car. It was an older sedan. Reliable, comfortable, nothing flashy. I'd had it for years, and it had taken me through long drives, bad weather, and the kind of late-night emergencies where you don't care how it looks as long as it starts. But to Mark, it was a gift-wrapped insult. He spotted it once in the parking lot outside a cafe, and from that moment on, it became his favorite topic. At first, it was little things. Hey, is that thing street legal? Or, I didn't know the antique show was in town. I laughed it off. Everyone did. But the more he saw it got a reaction, the bolder he became. Soon, every gathering had at least one moment where he'd bring it up. He'd lean back in his chair, smirk, and ask if I had to wind it up before driving. People would laugh. Some awkwardly, others genuinely. I stayed quiet. Here's the thing. I've learned that silence is a powerful tool. It makes people think you're ignoring them, when in reality, you're cataloging every word, every smirk, every self-satisfied glance. And Mark was giving me more than enough material. What he didn't know, and what I never hinted at, was that I had a different kind of vehicle sitting in a private hangar about 40 minutes outside the city. It wasn't brand new either, but it was mine. I'd bought it after years of saving and training. Not many people in my life knew about it, and I liked it that way. Flying had always been personal for me, a quiet escape, not a showpiece. But Mark made me reconsider. The opportunity came when a mutual friend organized a weekend getaway to a lakeside cabin. Most people planned to drive up together. I said I'd meet them there. Mark, of course, couldn't resist asking if my rust bucket could make it that far without breaking down. Laughter followed. I just smiled and said, "Don't worry about me." What I didn't say was that I'd already called ahead to the small local airfield near the lake. They'd clear me for landing that Saturday morning, right around the time everyone else was due to arrive by car. I could picture it in my head, the sound of the blades cutting through the air, the moment people looked up, the split-second confusion before recognition hit. And most importantly, Mark's expression when he realized who was inside. Little did he know, everything was about to change. The weekend trip was supposed to be simple. Leave the city Saturday morning, arrive by noon, spend 2 days at the lake, then head back Sunday night. That's what the group chat said. That's what everyone else planned. I had my own plan. By Friday night, the parking lot outside my building was buzzing. People loading coolers, tossing duffel bags into trunks, comparing playlists. Mark was there, of course, leaning against his shiny new sports car like it was part of his personality. He wore that smug half-grin that had become his signature. "Hope the old girl makes it," he said, nodding toward my car. "Need me to follow behind in case she dies on the road?" I forced a chuckle. "I'll manage." Microtension won. He wanted me to bite, but I didn't. Instead, I let the pause hang just long enough for him to think I didn't have a comeback. "Man," he added, turning to the group, "we should start a pool on whether it breaks down before the first gas station." Laughter rippled. Some shook their heads, but no one said a word in my defense. That should have been my first red flag. Not that Mark was being Mark, but that everyone else found it easier to laugh along than call him out. I got into my car, drove off, and didn't head home. Instead, I took the highway out toward the edge of the city, where the skyline gave way to flat fields and quiet airstrips. The closer I got, the more my pulse steadied. Flying always did that for me. Turned noise into calm, turned irritation into focus. Microtension too. Even as I pulled into the hangar, part of me wondered if I was making this petty. If maybe the smarter move was to just ignore him forever. But then I thought of that smirk, of the way he measured his worth in horsepower and chrome, and I decided some lessons are better delivered in person. The hangar doors groaned open, revealing my helicopter. Not brand new, not spotless, but mine. I did my checks, fueled up, and called the airfield near the lake to confirm my ETA. They'd have the small landing pad ready, just a few hundred yards from the cabin where everyone would be unpacking. As I strapped in, the morning air was crisp, the kind that makes every sound sharper. The engine came alive with a deep, steady hum, blades slicing the silence. I could already see it. Cars pulling in, trunks popping open, Mark talking loud enough for everyone to hear, and then that sound cutting through everything. Microtension 3. But as I lifted off, climbing above the fields, a thought slipped in. What if this backfired? What if it made me look desperate for attention instead of making my point? The ground dropped away. Roads turned into thin gray lines, cars into dots. My doubts stayed on the ground. By the time I spotted the glittering surface of the lake in the distance, I knew exactly how this was going to play out. Or at least, I thought I did. Because when I saw what was waiting near the landing pad, I realized this was about to be a lot bigger than just shutting Mark up. From the air, the lake looked like glass, smooth, perfect, reflecting the pale blue of the morning sky. The cabins dotted the shoreline like something out of a postcard. But it wasn't the view that caught my attention. It was the row of vehicles parked near the biggest cabin. Even from a few hundred feet up, I could pick out Mark's sports car, gleaming like he'd just driven it off the lot. But right next to it was something that made me narrow my eyes, a second luxury car I didn't recognize. Bigger, darker, more expensive. Microtension 1. It wasn't the car itself that got to me. It was who was leaning against it, sunglasses on, scanning the sky like he knew I was coming. As I dropped lower, the downdraft of the blades kicked up a storm of dust and lake air. People shaded their eyes, pointing, a few stepping back. The cabin deck was full of them, our friends, some with phones out, filming. And in the middle of them all was Mark, grinning like this was his show. But he wasn't looking at the helicopter. He was looking at the guy by the other car. I landed, shutting down the engine, the thump of the blades slowing. The airfield staffer waved me in, but I could feel every set of eyes on me. Mark finally turned my way, his grin faltering just a fraction before he slapped it back on. "You didn't tell us you were, flying in," he called out, voice loud enough for the group to hear. "I like to make an entrance," I said, climbing out. Microtension 2. That's when I noticed the cameras. Not just phones, actual cameras. Tripods. One of the girls holding a DSLR with a massive lens. This wasn't just a weekend trip. Something else was going on here. Mark walked over, his steps just a little too quick. "Listen, there's, kind of a thing happening today. Some people filming, for the channel." The channel. Right. His growing YouTube thing. Cars, trips, flashy experiences. He'd been talking about big plans for weeks, but I hadn't paid much attention. Apparently, this weekend was his big feature, and I had just landed in the middle of his shoot. Microtension 3. Part of me wanted to smile, knowing this wasn't just going to be a personal win. It was going to be caught on camera. But another part wondered if he was already spinning it in his head, figuring out how to make himself the hero of whatever story came out of today. I kept my face neutral. "Don't let me interrupt." "Oh, you won't," he said, but his eyes flickered. That microsecond where someone realizes their plan just got complicated. People were already drifting closer, snapping photos. And I could see it, the whispers starting, the comparisons. His sports car versus my helicopter. The guy with the dark luxury car still hadn't moved, but his gaze hadn't left me. Something about it felt deliberate. And when he finally stepped forward, offering his hand, the first thing he said made my stomach tighten, because it was clear he knew exactly who I was and why my being here mattered. He closed the distance between us with a kind of casual confidence that didn't match the usual friend of a friend energy. His sunglasses stayed on, but up close, I could see the reflection of the helicopter in each lens. "You must be Alex," he said. His voice was low, steady, not the fake cheeriness Mark used when he was trying to look like the life of the party. I frowned. "Have we met?" "Not in person," he replied, extending a hand. "But I've seen your work." Microtension 1. My work. That could have meant a dozen things. My actual profession, the small projects I'd kept private, or something more specific. I didn't like how vague he was being, especially with half the group now circling us like this was part of the entertainment. Mark's smirk twitched, just barely. "Yeah, this is Brian," he said, quick and clipped. "He's a friend." "Friend. Right." Mark's tone made it sound like he'd just been reminded to keep the label vague. Brian tilted his head toward the helicopter. "You fly often?" "Enough," I said. Why? Because Mark told me you drove here in what was it? A rust bucket? Brian's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Guess that wasn't the full story. The air around us shifted. People were listening harder now. Phones angled slightly toward us. Mark let out a short laugh, but it landed flat. Microtension too. That's when I realized something. Brian wasn't just here for the weekend. He was part of Mark's filming plan. And the way he was needling Mark in front of the cameras? That wasn't accidental. I like surprises, I said evenly, keeping my eyes on Mark. Makes life interesting. Brian chuckled. Oh, I'm a fan of surprises too. Especially the kind that ruin a carefully planned narrative. Mark's jaw tightened. All right, man, let's just get unpacked. No rush. Brian cut in, still looking at me. You know, Alex, you might want to stick around for the filming later. Could be educational. The word landed heavier than it should have. Educational. About what? Microtension 3. For a split second, I saw it. Mark's eyes darting toward Brian, then back to me, like he was silently telling him to shut up. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about me flying in and stealing his spotlight. There was something else simmering underneath, and Brian clearly knew it. The others drifted away toward the cabin, but the tension didn't break. If anything, it thickened. I wasn't sure if Brian was trying to warn me, bait me, or both. See you around, he said, finally stepping back. Mark moved in closer, his voice dropping. Don't read into anything he says. He likes to stir up drama. I raised an eyebrow. Sounds familiar. His mouth opened, then shut. He turned away without another word. And that's when I spotted it, sitting in the back seat of Brian's car, half covered by a jacket, something that had my name on it. Literally. It was just a glimpse, enough for my brain to register before the jacket shifted and covered it again. But I knew what I saw. A folder. My name printed on the tab in bold black letters. For a moment, I convinced myself it could be a coincidence. Maybe Brian worked with someone else who happened to share my name. Maybe it wasn't even a folder, just a trick of the light through tinted glass. Microtension 1. But then I caught Brian glancing at the car, his gaze flicking to me for the briefest second. Not curiosity, not confusion, recognition. I forced myself to walk toward the cabin like nothing was wrong. The others were inside, arguing about who got which room. Mark was loudly claiming the one with the best lake view. Typical. I let him talk. My mind was on the folder. Brian strolled in a minute later, relaxed as ever, leaning in the doorway like he owned the place. His sunglasses were gone now, revealing eyes that looked like they were constantly weighing and measuring people. You fly well, he said casually, as if we'd been mid-conversation. But I'm guessing that's not your only skill set. What's that supposed to mean? I asked. He shrugged. People have layers. Some are worth showing. Some aren't. Mark cut in from across the room. Brian, stop with the cryptic stuff. You're not in a spy movie. Brian didn't even look at him. I like knowing who I'm spending my weekends with. Don't you? Microtension too. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. He wasn't talking to Mark. He was talking to me. And it wasn't small talk. It was a test. I played along. Sure. Saves trouble later. That's exactly what I think, Brian said, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Which is why I do my homework. The words landed with weight. And just like that, I knew the folder wasn't a coincidence. We broke for lunch, people spilling out onto the deck with sandwiches and beers. I lingered inside, waiting for the noise outside to rise. Then I slipped toward the cars. The gravel crunched under my shoes, too loud in the stillness. My pulse hammered. I told myself I'd just check if I'd been imagining things. Microtension 3. I reached Brian's car, glancing around. No one was watching. Or at least, I hoped they weren't. I tugged the jacket back just far enough to see the tab again. My name. No mistake. The folder was thick, stuffed with printed pages and what looked like photographs. I didn't have time to look closer. Find something interesting? The voice came from behind me, calm and close. I turned slowly. Brian was standing there, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a paper cup of coffee. His expression was neutral, but the fact that he wasn't asking why I was there told me everything. He already knew. And then he added, almost casually, Mark's not the only one who's been underestimating you. Brian didn't press for an answer. He just took a slow sip of coffee, as if the silence between us was a chess clock, and he was perfectly fine letting me run down the time. I stepped back from the car, hands in plain view. Looks like you already know more about me than I know about you. That's the point, he said. Information first, conversation later. He turned and walked toward the lake, leaving me in the gravel with the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Microtension 1. I could have followed him and demanded answers. I could have gone straight to Mark and asked what the hell was going on. But neither of those options felt right. Not yet. Brian was playing a long game, and I wasn't going to blow my move before I understood the board. I went back inside, but the rest of the afternoon felt off. Mark was louder than usual, cracking jokes with forced energy, almost avoiding eye contact. Our friends drifted between the deck and the dock, laughing over drinks, oblivious to the undercurrent pulling at the edges of the group. Every time I caught Brian's eye, he looked away a beat too late, just enough to let me know he was keeping track of me. By sunset, I decided two things. Whatever was in that folder wasn't meant for public eyes. I was going to see it in full before the weekend was over. The question was how. Microtension 2. Breaking into a locked car wasn't exactly on my to-do list for a relaxing getaway, but the thought kept circling back. I could wait for him to slip up, leave it unattended, but Brian didn't strike me as the careless type. That meant I needed to create the opportunity. Dinner was served inside, buffet style. People piled plates high, found spots at the big oak table, or perched on the arm of the couch. I made a point of sitting where I could see the driveway through the window. Brian's car was still there, that jacket still hiding the folder. Mark sat across from me, launching into another story about his epic drive up here, complete with hand gestures. The more he talked, the more I realized something. His version of events was oddly detailed about his car and the road, but conspicuously vague about when Brian joined the trip. It hit me. Maybe Brian hadn't been an afterthought. Maybe he was part of Mark's plan from the beginning. Microtension 3. That made the folder even more dangerous. If Brian was here for Mark, why did he have anything with my name on it? Unless I wasn't just a side note. That night, when the group migrated to the fire pit outside, I stayed behind under the excuse of grabbing another drink. The hum of voices faded through the walls. I stood there in the quiet, looking at the keys hanging on the hook by the door. Brian's set was there. I picked them up, feeling the weight in my hand. The metal was cold, the teeth catching the light from the cabin. My pulse quickened. The line between bold and reckless was about to get very thin. And just as I started toward the door, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, and getting closer. I froze, the keys digging into my palm. The footsteps stopped just inside the doorway. You planning a midnight drive? Brian's voice was low, almost amused. I turned slowly, forcing a casual smile. Just thought I'd move your car closer to the cabin. Wouldn't want to do all over it in the morning. He tilted his head, like he was weighing whether to call my bluff. Then he shrugged. Knock yourself out. Microtension 1. That reaction threw me. If he suspected I was after the folder, he wasn't showing it. Maybe he really didn't care. Or maybe he wanted me to look. I stepped past him, pushing the door open into the cool night air. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I approached his car. The keys slid into the lock with an almost ceremonial click. Inside, the cabin lights spilled just far enough to illuminate the back seat. The jacket was still there, the folder half covered. My heartbeat matched the distant murmur of laughter from the fire pit. I pulled the jacket away and lifted the folder. It was heavier than I expected, the weight of paper, photos, maybe even a small hard drive. Microtension 2. I knew I didn't have long. I flipped it open just enough to see the top page, a printout of what looked like financial records. My name was at the top in bold. Dates, transaction amounts, and notes I didn't recognize. The next page was worse, a grainy photo of me at a cafe 2 months ago, sitting across from someone I barely remembered meeting. And under it, a single line, confirmed connection. I snapped the folder shut, the unease in my stomach hardening into something sharper. This wasn't random curiosity. This was targeted. I slipped the folder back exactly how I'd found it, dropped the jacket over it, and shut the door. The lock clicked, sealing whatever this was back inside. Brian was still by the doorway when I returned, leaning casually against the frame, arms crossed. Move it okay? Yeah, I said, keeping my tone flat. He studied me for a long second. Good. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. Microtension 3. That could have meant anything. The trip, the filming, or whatever game he was playing with that folder. I went to bed thinking I'd gotten away with it. I'd seen just enough to know I needed answers, and Brian hadn't stopped me. Maybe he didn't realize how much I'd seen. But in the morning, when I stepped outside, Brian's car was gone. So was the folder. Mark was on the deck, coffee in hand, smiling like he'd already won something. "Sleep well?" he asked, voice dripping with mock sweetness. And then he added, "Brian left early. Said you'd know why." The morning air was cold enough to make my breath visible. Mark's tone was warmer than it had any right to be. I set my mug down on the railing. Why would I know why Brian left? Mark took a slow sip of his coffee, eyes never leaving mine. "Guess you'll have to think about it." Microtension 1. He was enjoying this, not in his usual loud, attention-grabbing way, but with the kind of smug quiet that meant he thought he finally had leverage. The rest of the group trickled out of the cabin, yawning, talking about breakfast. Mark made no move to involve me in any of it. If anything, he seemed to be making sure I had space, the kind you give someone when you want them to feel isolated. I tried to play it cool, joining in small talk, offering to help with coffee refills. But the whole time, I was scanning the driveway. Brian's car was gone for real, no trace, no tire marks in the gravel except the fresh ones leading out. Halfway through breakfast, Mark pulled out his phone. "You know, Brian's a great guy to have on a project. Always does his homework." I didn't bite. He continued anyway. "Funny thing, sometimes he finds stuff that changes the whole story. Makes you see people differently." Microtension 2. He wasn't talking to me directly. He was talking to the table, planting seeds. And the worst part? I could see a couple of people glance my way like they were wondering if he meant me. "Care to share with the class?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Mark smiled. "Not yet. Timing is everything." The day passed in fragments. People heading out on kayaks, others lounging on the dock. I kept catching snippets of conversation, Mark's voice mixing in with just enough volume for certain phrases to drift over. "Not who you think. Interesting past. Makes sense now." By late afternoon, the energy had shifted. The easy chatter from yesterday was gone. People still talked to me, but there was a thin film of hesitation now, like they were holding something back. Microtension 3. That's when I realized the real danger wasn't whatever was in that folder. It was how Mark planned to use it before I even saw the full contents. He didn't need proof to start shaping the narrative. All he needed was to make it plausible enough for people to question me. I found him alone by the grill, flipping burgers like this was just another weekend. "What's your endgame here?" I asked. He looked up, eyebrows raised in mock innocence. "Endgame? I'm just telling people what I've learned. If they connect the dots, that's on them." "You mean if you hand them the dots and draw half the picture for them?" I said. He shrugged. "Perception is reality, Alex. And right now, yours isn't looking great." Then he slid something across the counter toward me. A single photo, face down. "Brian left this for you," he said, and walked away. I stared at the photo for a long moment before flipping it over. It was me, taken from across the street, grainy but clear enough to make out the setting. A downtown cafe I sometimes worked from. I was sitting at an outdoor table, talking to the same man I'd seen in that earlier photo inside the folder. Microtension 1. The timestamp printed in the corner was from 6 weeks ago. Underneath, in neat block letters, someone had written, "Pattern confirmed." I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. This wasn't just a random snapshot. It was presented like evidence. Evidence of what? I had no idea. But I could already imagine how Mark was framing it in his head. The rest of the group was still outside by the lake, laughter carrying faintly on the wind. I slipped inside the cabin, closing the door behind me. My reflection in the window looked like a stranger, tense, cornered, waiting for the hit. I didn't have to wait long. Mark strolled in, phone in hand, pretending to scroll. "You get my little gift?" "What is this?" I asked, holding up the photo. He smirked. "Proof. Or at least, something close enough to it." "Proof of what?" He shrugged. "I don't have to explain it. People will fill in the blanks themselves. All I have to do is make sure they see it before dinner tonight." Microtension 2. I realized then that this was the real game. The helicopter, the jokes about my car, they were just surface-level digs. This was about control, about rewriting how the group saw me. And he had something they didn't, the first strike. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. Mark's smile thinned. "Because you've been coasting, thinking you're untouchable. I'm just leveling the field." I felt a heaviness in my chest, not from fear, but from the realization that I'd underestimated just how far he'd go. The afternoon crawled. I avoided the group, staying on the edges, watching Mark move from person to person like he was working a crowd. Every time someone's eyes flicked to me afterward, it was with that split second of doubt. By early evening, the tension was thick enough to taste. I sat alone on the deck, the sun dipping low, painting the water in gold and red. The photo sat on the table in front of me, a silent accusation. Microtension 3. My mind ran through scenarios. Confront him in front of everyone. Try to track down Brian. Pack up and leave. None of them felt like winning moves. Every path ended with me looking defensive or guilty. For the first time all weekend, I felt the weight of isolation. Mark had the momentum, the narrative, and the audience. I had a helicopter and a photo that didn't make sense. I was dangerously close to believing he'd already won. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. If you want the truth, meet me at the airfield. Midnight. And below that, a single attachment, a photo of the folder, wide open, with the top page clearly showing my name. The airfield was quiet under the pale glow of the hangar lights. I landed the chopper just after midnight, the blades slowing with a deep, steady rhythm. The moment the engine died, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A black SUV rolled into view. The driver's side door opened, and Brian stepped out. No sunglasses this time. Just a faint smirk, like he'd been expecting me all along. I was starting to think you wouldn't show, he said. Microtension 1. I didn't answer right away. My eyes flicked to the SUV's back seat, where the folder sat in plain sight, no jacket covering it this time. You sent the text? I asked. He nodded. I don't like watching someone else control the story. Mark thinks he's clever, but he doesn't understand the difference between leverage and liability. What's in there? I motioned toward the folder. Brian walked over, picked it up, and handed it to me. Everything Mark's been using to set you up. Half of it's nothing, out-of-context photos, vague transaction logs. The other half, well, it's embarrassing for him, not you. I flipped through the pages, my pulse quickening. There were photos of Mark in meetings he definitely wouldn't want public, texts suggesting he'd staged drama for his channel, and even receipts tying him to deals that could get him banned from certain platforms. Microtension 2. Why are you showing me this? I asked, narrowing my eyes. Because I hate amateurs, Brian said simply. And Mark crossed a line, trying to make me part of his little performance. The decision formed in my mind before he finished speaking. If Mark wanted a spectacle, I'd give him one, just not the one he expected. By dawn, the plan was in motion. I returned to the cabin as the group was stirring, the smell of coffee drifting through the air. Mark was on the deck, phone in hand, clearly preparing to drop whatever proof he thought he had. Morning, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Before we head out, I think you should all see something. I set the folder on the table and stepped back. The others leaned in. Mark froze, color draining from his face as they flipped through the pages. What is this? One of them asked, holding up a printout of his staged messages. Mark stammered. That's not what it looks like. Oh, it's exactly what it looks like, I cut in. You've been trying to paint me as the problem while hiding the fact you've been manufacturing drama for content, and worse. Microtension 3, the group murmured, a few stepping away from him. Phones came out again, this time recording him. You set me up, I said, keeping my voice even. And you underestimated how fast the truth catches up. Mark tried to laugh it off, but it came out shaky. You really think anyone's going to believe? They already do. Brian's voice came from behind him. He'd been leaning in the doorway, silent until now. And I've got the footage to make sure they don't forget. The weight shifted in the room. The same people who'd been giving me side glances yesterday now looked at Mark with open suspicion and a hint of disgust. Mark's mouth opened, but no words came. He grabbed his keys and walked out, his footsteps sharp against the deck. As his car engine roared to life, I realized I'd never hear another word about my rust bucket. But I also knew this wasn't the last time someone would try to rewrite my story. The cabin felt different after Mark left. The air was lighter, conversations flowed again, and people who'd barely looked at me yesterday were suddenly asking if I wanted coffee, if I was joining the hike, if I needed anything for the trip back. I didn't need any of it. What I needed was the silence, not the awkward kind Mark had been using as a weapon, but the real, settling silence that comes when the game is over and the pieces have stopped moving. Brian stayed just long enough to hand me a USB drive. Everything you need is on there, he said. Keep it, or don't, but at least now you know. Why help me at all? I asked. He shrugged. I don't like when people try to turn me into a prop, and Mark's not very good at understanding who he's dealing with. With that, he left. No drawn-out goodbyes, no exchange of numbers. Just gone, like the weekend had been a job he'd just finished. By midday, the group had more or less gone back to normal. The tension had dissolved into lake water and campfire smoke. Still, I noticed the way people avoided talking about Mark, like mentioning him might invite him back into the room. We packed up Sunday afternoon. Most of the group headed out in their cars, chatting through rolled-down windows as they left. I took my time, making sure I was the last one on the property before heading to the airfield. The chopper's rotors cut through the stillness as I lifted off, the cabin shrinking below me. From up here, everything looked small. The dock, the cars, even the weekend itself. But the lessons? Those felt bigger than ever. Flying back over the city, I thought about the folder, the photos, the way Mark had tried to weaponize perception. It wasn't just about him thinking he was better than me because of a car. It was about control, about deciding who gets to tell the story. I'd learned something important. People like Mark don't really care about truth. They care about the version of it that keeps them in the spotlight. And the only way to deal with someone like that isn't to outshout them. It's to give them a stage big enough for their lies to collapse under their own weight. When I landed, I didn't rush to share the footage. I didn't post screenshots or start a counter-campaign. I let the people who'd been there talk. Word spreads faster when it's personal, when it comes from the ones who saw it with their own eyes. A few days later, I heard from one of the group. Mark had gone quiet online. His epic weekend video never got posted. Sponsors had backed off. Apparently, someone had forwarded the wrong kind of footage to the right kind of people. I didn't need to know the details. I just knew I could go back to living my life without hearing another word about my rust bucket. And if I ever did, well, I still had the helicopter.